right, so welcome back, everyone. Next up, we've got Henry from Alira. So Henry has worked as a tax lawyer for almost 4 years, and is now working as an associate solicitor for Cartland Law, which is a boutique tax and commercial law firm. Henry is also a lead developer of Alira, which is an artificially intelligent legal information research system. It automates legal research and information, so we'll be finding a bit more about that shortly. Alira has enabled non-tax professionals to pass university tax law exams, so I wish I had that back in the day.
Me too.
But it's now covering a lot more. So it's also covering the area of domestic violence, business structuring, wills and estates. Alira has powered the world's first law firm without lawyers. Henry will be speaking today on the rise of artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence can impact the professional space. Please welcome Henry.
Thanks, Darren, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had planetary alignments, the coming of Satan, solar flares, meteorites, thermonuclear war, a worldwide pandemic, most recently the singularity, which is otherwise known as the rise of a true artificial intelligence taking us over and killing us all. Humans around the globe, from every religion, from every time in history, love thinking about how we're all going to die. It just seems to be that one thing that we all love thinking about. And it doesn't matter, who it is. That's one common trait that I think we've all seen. Now, we might consider that this constant contemplation of our own destruction is somewhat unhelpful. And what I've seen is, essentially in humans, it creates a hypersensitivity to change. Any small change, all of a sudden, there needs to be a drastic result. And you're starting to see that with artificial intelligence. You've got movies like The Terminator and other movies, and even societies and things like that, even professionals worrying about what will artificial intelligence mean going forward. So a simple example of that, and I'm certainly not over-dramatizing it, is I'm also a counsellor, not the good kind, the bad kind, as a politician in local council in Adelaide. And we had a very simple example. There was a club, they wanted to install orienteering markers in a park so they could do orienteering. And so much so was the fear of that change that a local councillor got up and she said, no, I'm completely opposed to putting in these little tin markers on benches because I am worried that the wind will pick up those markers. They'll launch them at such a velocity that they're going to decapitate someone. And she said that in open forum in front of, our gallery, right? But the same thing happens very much with artificial intelligence, and same sort of thoughts. If you don't understand what's going on, you'll see it in your boardrooms and you'll see this change. And as professionals, how do we react to that change which is coming? So I'm a lead developer of Alira, which is an artificial intelligence. And the founder is Adrian Cartland, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. And we've opened the world's first law firm without lawyers up in Darwin. And it's in a shopping center. So when was the last time you saw a law firm in a shopping center, let alone an accounting firm? And it's 10 minutes away from a small town called Humpty Doo. It's in the middle of nowhere. And this is the next big change which is going to hit us. There is a firm there where you can go and talk to someone and get a will and get a trust deed without talking to a human. And that's what I want to talk to you today, is talk to you about that change and particularly how your businesses should look at it and how you can adapt to it. So this is it. So what happens is someone would come in, they make an appointment or they just walk in and they're greeted with a receptionist. And generally that receptionist, it could be anyone. It could be an 18-year-old, could be a financial planner, it doesn't matter what their qualifications is. And they sit and wait before they're called in, and out the back there's a room. And in that room they can sit down with a computer and by themselves go through and talk to Alira. And actually, in fact, everyone here can talk to Alira right now on your phones. You talk to it through Facebook. So the person logs in to that computer and talks to Facebook. Now, if they need it, Lauren, who's a third-year law student, who doesn't know what a beneficiary is, doesn't know what a trust is, doesn't know what a testator is able to guide them through that process. Now, there's one thing that lawyers in particular care more about than anything else? Does anyone know what that could be? Fees? Yeah. Any other guesses? Money? Yeah. Any other guesses? Being sued. And that's the right answer. Is lawyers fear most is risk. They fear going under, because you could have a successful career for 20 years, everything's going well, and all of a sudden you make a mistake and you cause $1 billion capital gain. Well, you probably don't have insurance for that, and that's it for you. So one mistake can cost you everything, and we call that a long tail risk. What's the odds of something very, very strange happening, very much outside of the norm, but has a calamitous effect on you? So as lawyers, our biggest consideration is risk. Now, in the world of tax, you have private rulings, public rulings, determinations, GST. You have, Twitter from the commissioner of how he's feeling that particular day. You have the ATO website, and then you've got, things on the internet, other websites. There's so much information. And how can somebody get across that? Even a doctor or something like that, in any profession, any professional sphere, there is so much information that you are expected to be across. And if you're not, you know what happens? It rests on your shoulders. And so that's where artificial intelligence can help. What it does is it can do that computing process for us and help us to mitigate those risks and come to a much better answer. And we see that actually being used now in courts, especially with discovery and things like that, to go through those documents and find whether there are any documents that, might have mentioned something or other. And artificial intelligence is very different from the regular way of searching, such as Google using keyword searches or things like that. It uses an algorithm which is machine learning. So it thinks almost in the same way we do. And I'll talk about that in a second. So this is what our product looks like if you wanted to chat to Alira right now. So you can go onto our website, and what will happen is it'll ask you questions, and then you answer it. And you can go through, and by the end of it, if you answer all those questions, it will develop a will for you. And it's different from a will kit, because the person they don't need to think. They just need to answer the questions simply and correctly. And the thing is that anybody can learn to do this. So on your way, a uni kid on their way to university, they're 18, don't know what a trustee is, don't know what an executor is, they can go through this and they can understand it. Because what is also very valuable about that human experience is that two-way conversation. So if you say, hey, I don't know what a beneficiary is, or why do I need a will in the first place? You can answer those, you can ask it those questions freely and openly, and it will give you back an answer and pause that conversation, which is one of the most valuable things that humans do, is we can pause a conversation and then pick it back up later on. And so at the moment in Darwin, we offer wills, we offer trusts. At the moment, what we're looking to do is we're in alpha stage for developing intervention orders. So that's our current process. Our current project is taking, say, information from a victim of domestic violence throughout a year. They put in, say, photos or statements or time logs, things like that. And then when they're ready, they can say, generate me an intervention order. Now, that's not only useful for them, because they don't necessarily need police support. They don't need someone to sit there and type it up. They can generate it themselves and make their own application. Or it can be very useful for people or industries like police, who then get to skip that 2-hour interview plus another however many hours drafting that document. And that's the same thing for many other areas of law. It can also triage people coming in. So if I'm a tax lawyer, if someone wants to ask me about property, I can give it a go, but you should probably go and see my referral. So somebody coming in, or somebody else in my firm, if you have multiple partners in a firm, somebody's coming in, when you can start that conversation, you can get their name, their contact details, you can start to get all that information, and when you sit down with them, you actually know what that you're going to ask them. So you don't sit in front of the person they ask you a question, and you have no idea what the answer is, because it's not always simple. You can start to get those questions early on, so when you come in, you already give them a plan, you already give them an answer. And we've found that in terms of preparing wills, a will can easily cost you about, how much does a will cost? I mean, the people here probably would be paying over $1,000, if not more, $3,000 for a testamentary trust. We offer our wills for $150. At the moment, they are confined to simple wills, and a simple will is perfect for me, because I'm not a partner, I don't have any shares or anything yet, hopefully. But my will is very simple. My will is, I give everything to my wife. If we have kids, it goes to my kids. If we all die in a car accident, it's split between our parents. Very, very simple. And that's what Alira does. That's what the beauty of it is. It opens up a market that didn't previously exist. It's a new market. The people in this room, when I hopefully get some shares perhaps, then I'll go and spend the money because I want that higher level advice. But for most people, they don't need it. For me right now, I don't want to spend $1,200. More than happy to spend $150. So the other part of Alira is our tax research, and this is our first product that we developed, and this is based on artificial intelligence or machine learning. Now, machine learning has been around for a very long time. Australia Post is probably a very iconic example. When you handwrite to go to somebody else to send them a letter, understanding what the letter D is for a computer is extremely hard. So what they do is they take thousands, hundreds of thousands of iterations of the letter D, and they put that through an algorithm. So generally, it learns what the general rules of a D are. What is a D? And then from that point on, it can always pick a D. And then that's how they start to read your letters. Now that's using images, and that's was one of the first applications, well, one of the widest applications of it. But now what we're doing is we've applied an algorithm in conjunction with a firm from Texas, a very smart guy, and we've now applied it to law. And what we do is we apply it to private rulings. So in this example, the question is, if a not-for-profit provides a bottle of wine to a volunteer, is that bottle of wine subject to fringe benefits tax? All right. Now, if you type that in, what happens is it will search through thousands, hundreds of thousands of private rulings and the internet and the ATO website, and it comes up with this. And this is what it highlights. And it says an NFP. And it recognizes that an NFP stands for non-for-profit because the conjunction with those two words, non-for-profit and NFP, have a high correlation. So they see it as interchangeable. Provides an NFP organization provides a volunteer with 6 bottles of wine valued at $110. This gift is not subject to FBT as the benefit is provided to a volunteer and not an employee. Now, at the end of the day, it'll give you a very good answer very close. And your clients actually, we're looking at actually putting this into Alira so people can ask these things. But at the end of the day, it still requires a human to understand that and apply it to a given situation. And the capability of machine learning in this algorithm far exceeds that of Google or a regular search engine. And they're starting to look at this as well. So a regular search engine would look at all of those words, all the words in the question, and then try and find them all in the thousands of documents. And of course, they're everywhere. The word tax is in every single document the ATO has. So how is it going to rank it? Whereas with machine learning, if I say the phrase, time flies when you're having fun, and fruit flies like apples, it understands that flies is different because it has a different correlation between those words in each sentence. It's not going to search them equally. And that's why machine learning, especially over documentation, is going to be so valuable. The other thing is, in my law firm, we have hundreds of files. Adrian's been a tax lawyer for far longer than I have, 15 years or something, and he's done many, many advices. And I say to him, what should we do for this client? And he says, I did this a couple of years ago. I think it was Bennett, maybe something, go and have a look and see if you can find my old advice. Well, that's a 3 or 4 hour exercise, isn't it? Trying to search through each document. And you might have juniors the same as you if you have advisors sitting there. How can you access the intellectual property that your firm or professionals have accumulated over the years? But by if you try and search for tax, you're going to get every single one. But if you search too specific, you're going to get 0 results. And so what artificial intelligence enables you to do is pick out what it thinks are the most useful clauses. And in actual fact, the more information you provide it, the more specific it's going to become. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set out all of the circumstances of my client, and then it's going to go and search through your IP and unlock that for one of your juniors or even yourself to even go back and try and find the stuff that you've already gone through. Now, looking through your previous tax papers to find that, it's not chargeable. It's not billable. Often it's going to be, it could take you 10 hours. It could take you 10 minutes. But with artificial intelligence and using Alira, you can unlock those documents, especially when they're huge. Now, what AI can do, there's a number of things. People start to think of it as, can it think for itself? Can it can it just completely replace me? Well, no, it can't. But what it can do is it can perform automated tasks. So I think, accountants, for example, in their early days, they would have had clients come in with a bag full of receipts. And if you're sitting at your desk and you're thinking, wow, this is a really boring task. All I'm doing is copying out receipts or doing procedural things that are over and over and over again, we can automate that. So like the conversation with the lawyer about my will, where do you want your things to go to? Then that is a conversation that is repeated time and time and time again. And that is something that we can automate. What it can't do is think. It can't be mindful. It can't think about the circumstances, what their best option is going to be. So we're currently building a case predictor as well, or even a trust deed analyzer or a lease agreement analyzer. So if you're an accountant and your client comes in with say a lease agreement, you can't really help them with that. You need to send them off to a property lawyer. But what we're looking at the moment is going through that document and looking at clauses and how those clauses are framed. And then saying, this is what we would normally expect to see. And we can highlight things which are advantageous or not advantageous. And so you can go to them and say, hey, look, if you're going to lease your property to somebody else, they brought you this contract, it has no make good provisions in this contract. You might want to think about putting one in. And so you can start to have those conversations. So what artificial intelligence is actually doing is expanding far greater. And you look at KPMG or the Big Four, they're expanding what services they offer. But what artificial intelligence enables a very small practitioner to do, an individual practitioner to do, is widen their field of search and still be competent in it. So humans and technology are symbiosis. Yeah, go for it.
Can you expand on what you meant by
Yeah. So based on, this is in our conceptual stage. And what we'd be looking at doing is taking the circumstances of what a client gives us. So different factors. So, he owned his own business, it cost this much, he sold it for this. Let's just say it's a, I don't know, breach of contract or something like that. So you put in all the facts that you normally set out as agreed facts. And then you say, this is what my client says, this is what they say, this is what's in dispute. And from that, looking at cases that have gone before and finding whether you can find them, and then giving a match to how similar they are and where the differences lie. So you could say, here are 10 cases which are 100%, and you all lose. You 100% loss. But or a different circumstance, and say, here are 10 cases, and here are the differences. Your client says that there was an oral agreement as well, or in this case there was another document, or there was surrender of lease done as well, or something like that. And then you can actually look at what those differences are. And it's a great way for a lawyer to, there's a huge amount of variables, and that could actually lead you in the right direction to ask those questions and say, because often your clients come to you and they say, oh, he's charging me all this extra rent and I'm not sure why. You're like, well, okay. There's probably a good reason why, and we just need to get that out of you. But what could be helpful is asking those pointed questions which are going to make a difference so that you can possibly have a different case.
And how does Alira differ to Alex?
Alex on the ATO? Yeah, Alex on the ATO. Look, I'm sure as many of us have referred our clients to Alex, yeah, and said, just go ask Alex. You don't need to ask me. The problem is that the Alex is set responses, and so what Alex is not doing is guiding you through a process. So what we're building it for, they're kind of different things. So Alex would be a search engine or with fixed answer and responses, and say, I don't understand your question. So if you say, what is tax? Alex might have a pre-programmed answer to that. Whereas if it says, should I pay tax? Won't understand the question. And so what we would be starting to build with Alira especially is those longer process questions that says, should I pay tax? Or do I need to pay fringe benefit tax on this vehicle? Okay, well, let's start that process. Let's ask you the number of questions that an accountant, there would be a series of questions that you could write down, and then you could figure out what that answer is, right? There's only a limited number of questions that you could ask, and you can get a definite answer. Rather than an accountant doing that with their clients and talking about a $5,000, $10,000 car, send them off to Alira and get that work done and say, I want you to do these modules and then come back to me. And so you don't need to sit down with them for an hour. That type of thing. So I'd like to talk quickly as well about the role of humans going forward. And I'll talk about Kasparov. So Kasparov was a grandmaster. I play chess, but I'm terrible. And there was a computer program called Deep Blue. They're still working on one for Go, which was even more complicated. But Deep Blue was a computer program or a machine learning algorithm or an algorithm that eventually beat Kasparov. He won the first game, but he lost the second. And from then on, it was seen as all of a sudden this very complicated game was, could be done better by a machine. And now we have a chess engine. We have chess computers on every single computer, on our phones, everywhere. We have artificial intelligence everywhere. And I'll talk about what we call artificial intelligence in a second. But what I found most interesting out of this story was that Kasparov versus a computer program, he loses to the computer program. Kasparov with a computer program versus a computer program, Kasparov wins. But what I found most interesting is that a developer or a producer or an engineer with a computer program, someone who understands how it works, using that tool, versus Kasparov, who was an expert with that algorithm, the person who understood how to use the tool will win versus the grandmaster. Okay, and that comes down to that university law exam as well. I spent 13 weeks at law school. I paid $5,000 to sit for the pleasure of sitting my tax law exam. I went a lot because I was a great tutor. And I spent a lot of money for that. And I got, whatever grade. But what's interesting is that Adrian's girlfriend called Sarah, she's a speech pathologist. She hates tax, has no interest in it. I sat her down, and I showed her how to use Alira in half an hour. I said, this is what you need to look for. This is kind of FBT, just so you know, stands for Fringe Benefits Tax, if you see that. So I gave her a list of, acronyms that she could understand the language that we talk. And she did better than I did in half an hour. It took me a very long time, 4 years. It was in my final elective, and it was slightly embarrassing. And Adrian said, well, maybe we should hire Sarah instead of you. I said, well, that might not be such a bad idea. Because that's the problem, is that juniors who are coming up, if you give them this software, if you give them this tool, then they can beat someone with 20, 30 years experience because they can use it better. They can access that information better than someone who just has it in their brain if you know how to use the tool. A better tool, a better outcome. Now, I'd like to talk briefly about what is artificial intelligence. People like to think about artificial intelligence as another human, right? They like to think about it as a being that wants and thinks and loves and whatever. But just quickly, if we have a calculator, those big old calculators that we used to have, and they couldn't do very much, or even a watch calculator or something like that. It could do calculations. But what happens if we give it a hard drive, a bigger hard drive, more RAM, a bigger motherboard, more and more and more infrastructure behind it? It can do bigger and bigger calculations. It can get stronger and faster. What if we improve its algorithm so that it can break RSI cryptography, so it can understand more complex prime numbers or things like that, a better computing method, so we can cut down on how much it's using, so it gets the most powerful computer in the world, most powerful calculator in the world. At what point would you say that it's now a human? Never, right? You'd never say that it's now a human. You'd never say it progresses just because it gets smarter, because it gets faster. It's never a human. All it is just smarter. It's just better at doing the task that it was done. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean if you have a hammer that's been evolved over 1,000 years, we now have jackhammers. How much more technology do you give to a hammer until it becomes a human? Well, it's never going to become a human. And that's very simply because if you look at a circuit board, it's fixed. There's only so many parts, but the human brain is adaptable. But most importantly, it can take into context. So if I'm looking out the window, don't look, but if I see someone running out and they're screaming and they say, run away, and then I hear a bell going off in the distance, and I hear a fire engine coming through, I can put all those things together in the time frame as well and know perhaps that building's on fire. But what happens if the person walked out and went, there we go again, and then sits there? But then I do hear the bell. So I do hear the bell, and I do hear the fire engine, and I say, well, actually, it's probably a false alarm. No need to panic. And only a human can do that because we're pulling together a broad range of things. We are writing our own script. To understand what an umbrella is, for example, that is a very complicated process that we can do very quickly. But to train a computer what an umbrella is, that is years. That is a very expensive program. And so I don't ever think that AI will become sentient and will ever have our wants and needs. If we could recreate the human brain, well then, you could just plug a hard drive. Why do you think about artificial intelligence? Just talk about an evil human who has a bigger brain or plugs himself into a computer. That's if you want to think about being able to adapt a human into a computer. But a computer's never going to have a want or a desire or a need unless we program it in. But humans, on the other hand, we're great at philosophy. Well, not so great at morals, especially lawyers. Empathy, even less so, but we like to pretend. Charisma, very charismatic, lawyers. Context is a big thing, which I talked about, and choice and judgment. And those are the things we're good at. We're good at getting people to understand what their needs are, what their wants are, what their desires are, and trying to formulate that. I might have a client who comes in and says, I want him to pay for what he's done, and I want all this money. And so, well, what do you really want? What's your actual objective? And they say, well, I just want my family to know that I didn't do the wrong thing. Well, we can go and spend 50 grand to win in court, or we can look at other solutions. What do you really want? It's interpreting each other. That empathy, that charisma, that type of thing is never going to leave. And that's why I say that you can never really have an artificial intelligence or a tool without a human operating it. Now, we've already seen in Woolworths and Coles, for example, you have the automatic tellers. It's the same thing. You have a robot that's taken over a human job, but you still have a lady there sitting, checkout Charlie or checkout chick sitting there and helping you with it if you have a problem, to help you get through it. And I think that will always be the case. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the bad news is that Deloitte Access Economics thinks that 40% of professional jobs will be lost to AI. 40% of your job that we do right now. That's pretty bad. And it's even higher in things like driving, for example. I mean, how many years before we have automated trucks? Truck drivers cost, 80 grand a year. It's a dangerous task that they can't do at night. How long before Elon Musk puts his truck on the road, which is already developed, which does have that automated driving? How many years until that happens? In which case, there will be no more trucks. That total line will disappear. But it won't be completely gone, because artificial intelligence can't think creatively. They can't really make those judgment calls or that make the persuasive calls to the ATO to say, hey, well, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about maybe changing the rules, because this doesn't seem very fair? The good news is that the supply curve will shift out. So particularly in wills, how many wills, there are a lot of wills lawyers at the moment who are worried about this. But what's actually happening is it's a market that's now untapped. So the people who don't have wills are probably I don't even have a will. It's my generation, because, my generation probably up to about 40. When you start having a kid, that's when you start to get serious about, thinking about these things, you get a bit more responsible. But up until then, it's cost prohibitive for me and cost prohibitive for most Australians. So if you can push out the supply, if you can drop the price, then that supply will increase, and it's a brand new market. And the great thing is that, and we're already seeing it in the Big Four, is they're offering services, and the lawyers are very unhappy about this, by the way, is they're starting to do tax advices, they're starting to do property law. The accountants, because they're the ones with the clients, they're the ones with the goodwill, are starting to snap up all these clients and keep them for themselves. So we don't need Minter Ellison to go and do our property law. We've got our own division now. And what AI is doing for us is that individuals, sole practitioners, sole accountants, sole lawyers, can now start to take more and more work across a broader field. And it's more interesting work. If you're sitting at your desk and it's boring, you can probably automate it. If you've done it before 100 times, you can probably automate it. What we need humans to do is think about new things. Think about those really close judgment calls, that 51%. What should we do? That's what we need to think about. And the ugly news is that there is no reason why we need Kasparov anymore. If Sarah can get a higher mark than I can, why do we need to go to university? Why do you need to have these barriers to entry that currently exist? Why do you need 20 years to now be an expert? No, if you want to be Gary Kasparov, you just need to know how your artificial intelligence works and drive it hard and drive it well. And all of a sudden, the range of tasks that you can do is massive. You don't need that 20-year barrier. So in a few years' time, I think you'll start to see more and more people like Sarah jumping into, because they have charisma, they have those human traits that they're better at probably than most lawyers, and taking over those jobs. But the biggest problem is the actual knowledge. So in terms of creating these processes, so I do tax law, but I don't do accounting. I'm not a builder, or I don't do fencing disputes. I don't know how those systems work. So I can automate things in tax or simple things, but what we need is knowledge to then tell us how to do it and how to achieve it. And what is that conversation? What is the questions that you ask your client? What's your decision-making process when you say, is that car subject to FBT? How does that conversation go to then tell me so we can automate it and create that system? Oh, that's not me, but close enough. This is Adrian in any case. And so, you know, my endpoint is that, you know, artificial intelligence is coming. It's already here. We've got a law firm up in Darwin that's doing the job that many lawyers are doing now. And so what we can do is, as professionals, you know, as senior professionals, we can go to our corporate bodies and say, resist, this is evil, we're scared about this. Don't implement it in our business. If you're sitting around your board meeting, talking to the other partners, say, no, this change is too big, it's all gonna be a failure, let's resist and resist. And you will delay it. You will delay it for some time. But then what will happen is some Facebook guy will create something completely new in a different country, and it will be here and you have no control over it. It will happen anyway. And when that happens, it's all gone. So you have three options. You can resist. You can wait until this technology comes and hits you. And you have someone like Elon Musk come and says, hey, we don't need courier drivers anymore. Sorry, I fixed that problem. Or what you can start to do is start looking at your own practices in your own firms and start developing your own artificial systems and start applying this technology so that you remain relevant and so that you now have control, broadening your scope of products and services that you offer. So you can be an accountant and sit there and do a will with somebody. You can be an accountant and do financial planning or other things, or fencing disputes is something that we're working on as well. A very simple process is, how do I solve this fencing dispute? So what I challenge you to do, I suppose, is the next time you're sitting in your office and you're doing something boring, is to think about, can this be automated? Am I doing the same thing over again? Am I asking the same questions over and over again? And then give me a call, because then we can automate that process. We can scale it and push it out and then monetize it. And that's where I see the future is. Thanks very much. I'm happy to take any questions as well.